What's up, everybody? Captain Matt here. Are you new to trotlining? You looking for some advice or guidance on making things go smoother? Stay tuned for more. This video is going to be all about deploying a trotline. We're going to go over the basics, some tricks and tips on how to make things go smoother. So stay tuned for more. Before we get started, this is going to be about actually using your trot line. I did two different videos. One I think is called prop sticks versus auto dippers, and then there's another one about trot lines themselves. You should be able to click right here. If you've got it hidden, it looks like a little eye, click it and it'll drop down a video or two showing you where you can go over the equipment needed to run a trot line. But we'll do a little recap with this diagram. So here's a picture of how it looks when it's all laid out. We'll start from the left to right, and it's just reverse on both ends. You start with an anchor, and then I refer to it as a lead line. It goes up to a buoy. Then from that buoy back down to a chain is another lead line, and you have the chain. And from the chain, your baited line is connected to that chain. Goes across the water, and then it just reverses on the other end. It goes chain, lead line, buoy, lead line, anchor. So not everyone uses an anchor float, but they come in really helpful in two aspects. First is, commonly as you run the line and as the tide changes, you're going to get some slack or tightness into your line, or you may just need to adjust your line. Maybe it's too tight or maybe it's too loose and you just need to make adjustments. This makes it much easier to adjust the tension on your line. Without that line, you would have to go to your buoy, start grabbing your line back towards your anchor, re-pick up your anchor, pull tight or loosen it a bit, and then drop your anchor again. You know, if you're looking to slacken your line a little bit, maybe a couple tugs just to loosen up your anchor and get it out of that mud or murk or whatever it's in. But if you actually want to get it tighter, it's a huge pain in the butt. The second area where the anchor float will come in handy is when you're actually getting ready to pull the line in. We're not going to cover pulling the line in today, but it gives you a great starting point where you run down to that anchor float, and instead of having to run to the buoy and then hand pull back towards your anchor and get your anchor, you just pull up that anchor float and you have your anchor right there and you just motor it on down. So for the purpose of this video, we're going to assume you have a helper. You know, I might call out, you know, if you're by yourself, you know, you could do X, Y, Z, but I think if you're a beginner, new, most of the time you're going to be going out with somebody. So the first thing you got to choose is where you want to deploy your equipment from, and it's all really going to vary based off of your boat and the way it's laid out. First, when you're deploying the line, you want it free of possible snags. If there's a snag point, more than likely at some point it's going to snag. Cleats are usually in the way. So in my boat, if I tried to deploy and put my baskets in the back of the boat, you know, it's right next to a cleat. If it comes out of the basket the wrong way, it could get wrapped around the cleat and it just causes all sorts of issues. So you really just want to try to avoid as many snags as possible. That's why most people choose to put their basket or their tub or whatever they have their line in the farthest possible spot in the back of the boat. As you can see in this clip, I choose to deploy my lines from the side of the boat. You know, for me, when I'm out there by myself, I like to have that basket close to me. So where I deploy my line on the side of the boat, I can sit there at the helm and operate the boat, but I can also have my hand back there in case it's needed to get rid of, you know, knots and snags and such. And I like to keep my hand on the line as it's deploying just to feel. So I'm usually paying attention to what's in front of me instead of watching the line come out of the barrel or basket. Now when you bait your line and you put it in your tub, basket, whatever you're going to store it in, you know, the best thing is just a loose, random lay. It doesn't need to be coiled or anything else. That's just the best. Just try to not overlap. So just randomly place the bags in the line, in the basket. There's no certain order. Trust me, it's not going to knot. You just want it kind of nice and even as it builds up. You don't want it all piled up on one side and then start on another side. You know, just try to randomly, evenly, and just evenly build it up from the bottom up. So you know where you're going to deploy from, and yeah, I'm going to just assume that you have your basket full of your line and just baited and ready to go. So the next thing is to make sure it's ready to be deployed, and what I mean by that is attaching your anchors, attaching your floats, and if you choose to use an anchor float, have that attached as well. So now just a little look on how I like to get mine set up. Huge shout out to Sam and Captain Rachel You know, it was just something silly that I saw in the video, the way she did this in her boat, and I adopted it and made things so much simpler. So obviously I use trash cans here. You don't need to use trash cans. You could just use orange baskets, mini tubs. There's no real right or wrong. It's whatever works for you and what fits in your space of your boat. But when you bait your line, it's always helpful to have the two attachment points ready to go, where you would need to attach your buoy and your anchor. This particular basket is rigged to connect another line, so when I double up my lines, so you won't see that on this side, but over here I can see this is where I would attach my buoy, and then this is the clip that I would attach my anchor on. So as I get to my spot, I'm getting ready to lay out. All I really need to do is disconnect these from the handle. I usually have them wrapped around the handle so they don't go anywhere. Take my anchor lead and connect it to my anchor. And then I take my buoy lead and I connect it to my buoy. And then I would do the same if I had the same setup. This is, like I said, dual lined, so I connect another line here, actually chain, then go to another line. But if I was running one piece of line, I would have the same on this side. Now if you are running one line and you have a tub or container, whatever you're storing your line in, it's really helpful, and I didn't always do this, but it's really helpful to actually have your lead lines bunched in with your main line. So before you bait, you would, you know, spool up your lead line into the bottom of your basket barrel, find a place to attach the hooks for your anchor and your buoy, then continue to feed your lead line in, and then drop your chain in, and then start baiting up your line and drop that in, and then you do the reverse, put a chain on top, then your lead line, and then attach your clips for your other anchor and buoy on the other side of whatever you're using. That way it's all ready to go. What I used to do when I was first starting out, which wasted a lot of time, is I'd have my line in my basket, it was ready to go, and I had the two clips on both sides, but I still had to rig up my lead lines, and these are my old lead lines I used to use, so I'd have to sit on the water, undo all these. They're usually not, break out the chains, hook it all together, get my buoys together. So I'd usually waste, you know, 20 minutes or so, even more, depending on how many knots I had, getting everything ready. You know, this way, if you have big enough basket, you know, all you have to do is attach your anchors and your buoys, and you're ready to go. And if you're even more of a diehard, you can leave your anchors and your buoys already attached, and you don't even have to worry about that. It just saves you time once you're actually out on the water. At this point, you have your gear ready, you have an idea of how you want to lay your line and direction. If you're with somebody or whether you're doing it yourself, motor out to where you want to begin to deploy. Now these are the optimal conditions, and this is just the perfect world conditions, right? You would prefer to be traveling down the line with the wind or with the tide. That means the wind and tide are kind of carrying you down the line. That way you can run slower. Based off of where the sun is for most of the day while you're going to be out there, you do not want to be casting shadows over your line. So for me right here, the sun's right in front of me, so if I were to be running this way, I would want my boat behind. So just imagine if the sun's this way and this is my line, I'm going to want to be running it on this side. That way the shadow's behind me, not casting over the line. Shadows will have a tendency to spook the crabs. If it's an overcast day, you might get away with it. But at certain times, you'll definitely see the crabs dropping off, especially if it's nice and bright and all of a sudden they see a dark shadow. They just tend to get spooked. Another optional habit, especially if I'm going to a new area, run that line. If you have the time, you're not in a rush, you don't think someone's going to come take your spot, run that path. Just get to your start point, run in the direction you want to go, pick a landmark at that point. Right, that's the key. Unless you're going to use your compass, most people just pick a landmark in front of them and try to steer towards that landmark from their starting point. But it wouldn't hurt if it's a new area to you just to run that once. Make sure you're in the targeted depth or the structure you're looking for, and that you don't see any other buoys, debris. That way you know it's going to be 100%. So we're back at the starting point. You have everything ready and laid out on your deck wherever you're going to lay it. If you have help, you know, obviously the first thing to do, as you'll see in the video, is drop your anchor. You don't necessarily need to be stopped. I just motor around and casually just throw the anchor over and let it go. And that way I keep my forward momentum in the direction I want to head. In my situation, I always like to have my hand feeling the line as it goes out. If I start feeling some tension here, I know I either got a snag or a knot or something like that. If it's nice and loose, I know there's more than likely no issues coming. So now you dropped your anchor, you just got to pick a speed that you're comfortable cruising at. If you're using a trot line with snoods, there's more chance of tangles and knots versus, say, just a trot line with direct attached chicken or bait of choice. I typically run about 2.5 to 3 miles an hour just to play it safe. One thing is if you had brought your line back in with a winder, you typically want to run a little slower the next time. There's more chance of knots. But like I said, if you're using chicken direct attach, any kind of, even chicken with snoods, you can get away with running a lot faster than you can with snood bags. Just remember that whatever speed you choose, if you do hit a snag or a knot, you end up going to create a bigger mess in the end versus taking your time. So as you see here, I drop my anchor and just usually have my hand out, letting the lead line out, get the buoy out, back to the lead line, and the chain goes in, and then the beta portion of the trot line. So at this point, you definitely need to be headed in the direction that you want your lay to run, whether you're using compass headings or visual landmarks out going forward. Try to make that run forward as straight as possible. One factor to keep consideration is if the tide and or wind is going to cross your lay. Even if you're visually looking at your landmark or you're using it as a guide, as the wind could push you to the left or right, you're then readjusting your boat, you're actually sliding sideways, which can throw off your lay. You may just end up going a little bit crooked from what you actually think you're laying. You can compensate by this by turning into the wind or into the tide. Pick your landmark and then pick a landmark just to the right of it. So you're giving yourself a little angle into the wind or into the tide, and your boat's still gonna drift back to your landmark, and it should get you where you need to go. So if you're solo, just keep an eye on your bucket to make sure you're not getting knots. If you got someone there helping you on board your boat, just make sure you're in good communication with each other. The person that's letting the line out should yell, holler, communicate with the operator of the boat, just saying, hey, knot coming up, or I got an issue, pop it neutral. Give him time to get the knot or snag undone before it actually pulls tight. Once it pulls tight, it's just a little bit harder to get done. You prefer to just get the messes out before it actually starts pulling tight. Snags aren't the end of the world. Just pop it neutral. Do what you can to get the snag done as quickly as possible so you're not throwing yourself way off course. Once your snag's undone, you can try to course correct and then swing back more left and then straighten back out towards your landmark. Unless you're using an app like I use Navionics, where I can it'll draw a line as I'm driving, it's hard to kind of visualize how off you are when you're out there running your lay. If you do get a little bow, it's not the end of the world. I'll show you a little video here. You can see where I have a knot, and it took me a while to pop it neutral, get the snag knot undone, and then I got back on my way. In this video here, you can see actually how the line rides on the outside of the auto dipper, just because that's just the way the current was carrying me that day. The winds were basically non-existent that day, but the current was going out. In the background, you can see Tillman Island. I think it was close to Claiborne in this video, and I was just shooting right out to the Eastern Bay. So when I got my knot, you can see in this video, as I'm running the line, I get to the section where I have my knot. All of a sudden, I had to make a hard turn away, and then that can happen, that will happen. Typically if you keep running your line, eventually it'll straighten itself out, because as you run it, you're kind of pulling it up and pulling it forward. So you could also use your sonar as a tool if you know that if I run this straight route, I'll between, say 7 to 8 feet or 7 to 9 feet, and all of a sudden I see I'm in 10 feet, then you know that you're kind of way off, and maybe you need to course correct back to left or right, depending on which way you need to go. When you get to the end of the run, when you're tightening your line, if you pull it extra tight, it has a tendency to try to straighten out the line between the two buoy points. So when you get to the end, obviously it's reversed, your chain goes down, then you got a lead line to a buoy to your anchor, and this is where I use my anchor float. And so I'll just drop my anchor in, and so then I'll just hold on to the line that is the anchor float. At this point, if you're pretty confident you went nice and straight and you are where you need to be, I'll just hold on to the buoy enough to where you start to feel tension. You'll feel the tension increase over time. The buoy, the anchor will become harder and harder to hold on to. It's hard to really give any sort of recommendation to how tight or how long you need to hold on to. It's just going to take some repetition on your half. It's all going to vary based off of the type of anchors you use and the type of bait. how long your line is, the weather conditions, your boat, and how much power it actually pushes in, say, idle or neutral. There's all sorts of factors. Just if you're just starting out, just hold on to it for a bit to say 5-10 seconds, let go, check the line, see if it's actually too tight or too loose. And from there, you can use that as a gauge as you continue laying out your trot line and figure out how long you really need to hold on to it. Now, when it gets to how tight or loose you want your line, that really depends on where you're crabbing, the conditions, and again, how your setup is. Some of it has to do with your prop stick and how far your prop stick as it actually sits out of the water. So once you pull up to your trot line, hook it onto your prop stick and start running past the chain, you'll get a good idea of where the baits are appearing in the water. If your line and your baits are appearing way out front, nowhere near where you could actually scoop the crabs off, that means you're a little too tight. You'd go back to your anchor or your anchor float, give it a couple tugs back towards the line just to give it a foot or so of looseness, and try to loosen up the line a bit. If once you get the line on your prop stick and it's too droopy and you can barely see the line at all and it just seems like the bags are appearing out of nowhere, that's probably a little too loose. Go back to one of your anchors, your anchor float, pull it opposite direction and get it to tighten up a bit. So it's just that easy. It may sound intimidating or you might be confused. Once you get out there, do it a couple times, not as overly difficult as it seems. And finally, just be patient. If you're new to trout lining or you even just got a few trips in and it frustrates the hell out of you, just be patient. It becomes more natural over time. You'll learn something every time you deploy it. It's a lot of work just to get to that point. You're out in the water. Just take a deep breath and realize once you get this thing in the water, then you're gonna be out doing the fun part of crabbing. I've gotten lots of great feedback. I've gotten lots of ideas of people making requests of videos to do, and I have them all written down. I'm gonna get to them, but if you have one, send it to me. Either leave a comment down below or send me an email address in the about section of this channel. And until next time, I'll catch you later.